live in a quiet neighborhood. It's not the kind of place where you'd expect anything bad to happen. But after what I experienced, I know now that horror doesn't always come with a warning. I was home alone one weekend while my parents were out of town. I'm 18, so it wasn't a big deal for me. I actually liked having the house to myself. Our house is a single story with an attic and a small crawl space under the floor. The crawl space was one of those things we never really used, just a dark, musty gap between the foundation and the hardwood. The first night alone, I stayed up late watching TV in the living room. At around 2 a.m., I heard something, a light tapping sound. I paused the TV and listened. It was faint, but it was coming from under the floorboards. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the house settling. But then I heard something else. Breathing. Slow, shallow breathing. I froze. It was coming from directly beneath me. I grabbed my phone and used the flashlight to check the vent in the floor. The vent had tiny gaps, and when I bent down to look, I saw something that made my stomach drop. A human eye. I jumped back so fast, I knocked over the coffee table. My heart was pounding. Someone was under my house, watching me. I grabbed a kitchen knife and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. I called 911 and told them someone was in my crawl space. They sent officers right away. When they arrived, they pried open the crawl space hatch from outside. What they found still haunts me. There was a small sleeping bag, empty food wrappers, and worst of all, a notebook filled with pages of my name. My daily routines, times I was home alone, even drawings of my bedroom. The man was nowhere to be found. The police suspected he had slipped away when I went to my room, using one of the side exits in the crawl space. For weeks, I barely slept. Every creak in the house made my skin crawl. We installed security cameras and sealed off the crawl space. But to this day, I still have nightmares of that eye staring up at me, because I'll never know how long he was watching me before I finally noticed. I used to babysit for a family that lived in a big old house on the edge of town. The house was built in the 1950s and had a strange layout. Lots of rooms, narrow hallways, and weird little doors leading to crawl spaces and storage area. One night I was watching their 6-year-old son, Max, while his parents went to dinner. It was an easy gig: feed him, let him watch a movie, and put him to bed. Around 9 p.m., I was sitting in the living room scrolling through my phone when I heard Max's voice from upstairs. "Who are you?" I froze. He was supposed to be asleep. I ran upstairs to his room, expecting to find him talking to a toy or maybe having a bad dream. But when I opened the door, he was sitting up in bed, staring at the closet. "The man," he whispered. My stomach dropped. "What man?" I asked, keeping my voice calm. "The man in the second door." I had no idea what he meant. I looked at the closet. It had one door. "Max, there's no second door," I said. He pointed to the back wall inside the closet. That's when I saw it. A small, hidden door. I'd never noticed it before. It blended in with the wall, just a thin wooden panel with no handle. I walked closer, trying not to freak out in front of Max. I pressed my ear against the wood. Silence. Maybe it was just an old storage space. But then, from the other side of the door came a soft knock. I nearly screamed. I grabbed Max and rushed him out of the room, my heart slamming in my chest. I locked his bedroom door and called 911. The police arrived fast. They searched the house while I held Max in the living room, trying to stay calm. Then one of the officers came downstairs, his face pale. "We need to show you something." I followed them upstairs. One officer had forced open the hidden door. Behind it was a small, dark passageway leading to another section of the house. But it wasn't empty. There was a sleeping bag, empty water bottles, food wrappers, and worse, a pile of children's clothing. The officers searched the house from top to bottom. Whoever had been staying there was gone. Max's parents were horrified. They had no idea the hidden passage even existed. The police never found the man, but they told the family someone had been living in their walls, watching, listening, and I still can't shake the image of that door, because when I first looked at it, I swear it was closed. But when the police opened it, it was unlocked. I grew up in a small suburban neighborhood where all the houses looked pretty similar. A couple of years ago, I was living alone in a single-story house at the end of the street. It was a quiet area until one night made me question if I'd ever been safe at all. It was a Friday night around midnight. I had just gotten into bed when I heard the front doorknob jiggle. At first, I thought I imagined it, but then it jiggled again, harder this time. Someone was trying to get in. I grabbed my phone and crept toward the door. I didn't have a peephole, but I could see the shadow of someone standing outside. They weren't knocking. They weren't saying anything. Just trying the handle over and over. I locked the door hours ago, but I still reached out and tested the knob just in case. The second I touched it, the person on the other side stopped moving. Silence. I held my breath. My heart was pounding. Then in the quiet, I heard a man's voice whisper, "I know you're in there." I ran to grab a knife from the kitchen and called 911. But as I was talking to the operator, something made me freeze. I could hear footsteps circling my house. Slow, deliberate. Then came a soft tapping on my bedroom window. I didn't want to look, but I did. There in the darkness stood a man. No mask, no attempt to hide. He was just staring at me through the glass, grinning. Then he raised his hand and pointed at my back door. My blood turned to ice. I heard it. My back door clicking open. I had locked it. I was sure I had locked it. I ran out the front door, barefoot, into the street. The police arrived minutes later, but the man was gone. There was no sign of forced entry, no prints, nothing. But there was one thing the police found, something that still makes my skin crawl. The man had left a note on my back door, just 4 words scrawled in red ink, "Wrong house, next time." I moved out a week later because I don't know who he was, and I don't think he made a mistake. I used to work late shifts at a diner a few miles from my house. I'd get home around 2 or 3 a.m., too exhausted to do anything but crash into bed. One night after a long shift, I pulled into my driveway and noticed something strange. My front porch light was off. I always left it on. I sat in my car for a minute, staring at the dark house. Nothing seemed out of place, but something felt off. I grabbed my phone and texted my friend just in case. "Something feels weird. Call me in 5 minutes." Then I got out and unlocked my front door. The second I stepped inside, I felt it. The air was heavy, thick, like someone had been breathing in there for too long. I locked the door behind me and stood still, listening. The house was silent. I told myself I was being paranoid. I went to the kitchen, got a glass of water, and headed to my room. Then, as I walked down the hallway, I heard it, a soft whisper, "Go to bed." I froze. It had come from inside my room. I turned back toward the front door so fast I nearly tripped. My hands were shaking as I tried to unlock it. Then behind me I heard footsteps. Slow, steady. I didn't look. I flung the door open and ran to my car, locking myself inside. My phone buzzed. It was my friend calling me back. I answered in a whisper. "Someone's in my house." She told me to stay put while she called the cops. I stared at my bedroom window, expecting to see a face, but it was just darkness. The police arrived 10 minutes later. They searched the house while I waited outside. When an officer finally came out, his face was serious. "You live alone, right?" he asked. I nodded. "Then you might want to see this." I followed him inside. The house looked normal until we reached my bedroom. My closet door was open. Inside, crouched in the corner, was a small, dusty vent. It had been removed from the wall, and beside it, on the floor, was a crumpled blanket, an empty water bottle, and my missing porch light bulb. Someone had been living inside my walls, watching, listening, and worst of all, they knew my routine. I moved out a month later. But sometimes when I'm home alone at night, I swear I still hear it, that soft whisper, "Go to bed." I live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever happens. But one night, something happened that I still can't explain. It started when I got home from work around 10 p.m. I had a habit of turning on the TV as background noise while I made dinner. That night was no different. I flipped to some random channel and went to the kitchen. As I was chopping vegetables, I heard something strange. A voice. It wasn't coming from my phone. It was coming from the TV. I turned my head. The screen was filled with static. I could barely make out an image behind the fuzz, something moving. I grabbed the remote to change the channel, but the second I pressed the button, the static cleared. A man was sitting in a dimly lit room. He was wearing a hoodie, head slightly tilted forward, like he was watching something. Then he looked up, not at the camera, at me. I froze. He was staring directly at me through the screen, like he could see me standing in my kitchen. I hit the power button, but the TV wouldn't turn off. I tried unplugging it, nothing. The screen just flickered, and the man smiled. Then, in a deep, distorted voice, he whispered, "You left your back door open." I dropped the remote, my stomach twisted. I turned my head toward the hallway. From where I stood, I could barely see the back door. It was slightly ajar. I was sure I had locked it. I was sure. I grabbed the closest knife and ran to slam it shut. My hands were shaking as I turned the lock. Then I heard something behind me, a voice from the TV. Too late. I spun around expecting to see someone in the house, but there was no one. Only the man on the screen. He was closer now, his face inches from the camera, his mouth slightly open, like he was breathing against the glass. And then, the screen cut to black. The TV finally shut off. I stood there in complete silence, my heart pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears. I checked every lock, every window, every closet. Nothing was out of place, but I didn't sleep that night. And when I checked my security camera footage the next morning, my blood ran cold. At 9:57 p.m., 3 minutes before I got home, a man in a hoodie walked up to my back door. He stood there for a full minute. Then just before he disappeared from view, he looked up, directly into the camera, and smiled. I live in a high-rise apartment building, one of those older ones with a dimly lit hallway and an elevator that creaks when it moves. I've been here for 2 years and nothing weird had ever happened, until last night. I got home from work around midnight. My building is mostly quiet, but as I stepped into the hallway, I noticed something strange. The elevator doors were open, just sitting there. No one inside, no one getting on or off. I figured someone called it but never used it. Whatever. I walked past and headed for my apartment, but as I unlocked my door, I got this feeling like someone was watching me. I turned my head and glanced down the hallway. The elevator doors were still open, and that's when I noticed the button for the 13th floor was lit up. That was weird. My building doesn't have a 13th floor. Like a lot of older places, they skipped it for superstitious reasons. It goes from 12 straight to 14, but the button was glowing. Then just as I was about to look away, the doors slammed shut. I stood there for a second, feeling uneasy, but I told myself it was just a glitch, maybe some maintenance thing. I went inside, locked the door, and got ready for bed. Then at around 3 a.m., I woke up to a noise, a soft, rhythmic knocking, not on my front door, on my bedroom window. I live on the 12th floor. There's no balcony, no ledge, just a sheer drop to the street below. My heart was pounding. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I turned my head and nearly stopped breathing. A hand, a pale, bony hand, was pressed against the glass. Fingers long and stretched, almost too long, and beyond it, in the darkness, was a face. Not a person, not quite. Its eyes were wide, almost bulging, and its mouth was too big for its face. It was grinning. I scrambled out of bed and ran straight to my front door. The knocking stopped. I grabbed my phone and dialed security. I tried to stay calm, but I could barely get the words out. There's someone outside my window. The guy on the other end was silent for a second. Then he said, "Sir, you live on the 14th floor." My stomach dropped. "No," I whispered. "I live on 12. Another long pause. Then finally he said, "Sir, check your peephole." I didn't want to. I really didn't want to. But my hand moved on its own. I pressed my eye to the peephole. And there it was, that same grinning face staring right at me. I stumbled back, heart racing. The knocking started again, slow, deliberate. I called security again, but this time no one picked up. Then, the knocking stopped. I waited, listening, barely breathing. After a few minutes, I finally built up the courage to check the peephole again. Nothing. The hallway was empty, but when I turned back toward my window, there was something new. Scratched into the glass, in shaky, jagged letters, were three words: "Let me in." I moved out that morning. I don't know what I saw. I don't know what floor I was really on. But sometimes when I take the elevator in a new building, I swear, for just a second, the 13th floor button flickers on, and the doors stay open, waiting. I was never supposed to look inside. The noises had been there since the day I moved in. Faint scratching, soft thuds, sometimes a wheezing sound, like something struggling to breathe. The landlord said it was just the old building settling. Nothing to worry about, he told me. But the first time I saw movement inside the vent, I knew he was wrong. It happened late one night. I had just gotten home from work, exhausted, when I heard it. A soft, dragging noise overhead, moving slow, deliberate. I looked up at the ceiling vent in my hallway, and then something inside shifted. The metal slats bowed outward, as if something was pressing against them from the inside. I should have run, should have called someone, but I just stood there, hard hammering, staring up at the vent. Then, the cover snapped open, and I saw it. A face, not human, not entirely. It was too thin, stretched like it had been starved for years. Eyes too wide, reflecting the dim hallway light. Lips cracked and dry, opening slightly as if it wanted to speak. I stumbled back, knocking over a chair. It twitched at the sound, then slowly, so impossibly slowly, it lifted a single, bony finger and pointed. At my glass of water on the table, my body was frozen, my mind screaming at me to do something, but all I could do was watch. Then, the glass moved, not tipped over, not nudged. It slid across the table, toward the vent, as if pulled by invisible hands. That was when I lost it. I grabbed my phone, my voice shaking, and yelled, "I'm calling the cops!" The thing flinched. Its wide, dry mouth opened, and finally it spoke. "Don't." The voice was raspy, like dead leaves scraping together. "I'll be quiet." It blinked once, slow. "A deal." I didn't answer. I couldn't, but it already knew. Water, every day, and I stay quiet. I felt sick. My entire body screamed at me to run, to leave this place and never come back. But somehow my head nodded. That night I left a bowl of water near the vent. In the morning it was empty, and the apartment was silent. That was months ago. I still don't know what it is. I don't ask questions. I don't look inside the vent. I don't tell anyone. But every night when I come home, I leave the bowl. And every morning, it's always empty, except for the nights I forget. Because on those nights, I wake up to the sound of metal scraping and something breathing right above me. Subscribe for more dark tales.